Listeners, here's an invitation for a few of you who are politically different from each other to participate in a constructive conversation experiment we're planning for next week. Listen for a second and I'll tell you how to apply if you're interested in being in it. Now that the 250th birthday hoo-ha is over, we're launching a series called America 251. The goal will be for more Americans to get to know each other again this year in our very polarized country, where we're sorting ourselves into echo chambers via social media and even where we choose to live. But let's not have another civil war. What do you think? Here's how we'll start. We want to match one listener who is really proud of our country right now. We got some like that right after the 4th of July. And one listener who is really ashamed. We got some like that too. We're not going to have a debate. We're just going to ask about your lives and your feelings and see if we can have a constructive, good faith conversation. Who knows where it might lead? If you want to be considered to participate in this experiment, go to WNYC.org/America251 and let us know. We'll pick 2 people to come on with us for one segment next week. Again, if you consider yourself really proud to be an American right now, or if you consider yourself really ashamed, fill out the form at WNYC.org/America251, and we may be in touch to invite you for a constructive conversation experiment on the air.
It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar, filling in for Brian. Now we'll hear about why Errol Louis says it's time to end the Specialized High School Admissions Test, also called the SHSAT or SHSAT. It has to do with this. Stuyvesant High School, considered the most selective of the specialized public schools, admitted 777 students to its incoming freshman class. Only 3 of those students were Black and only 21 were Hispanic. Citywide, about 62% of public school students are Black and Latino. And Errol Louis, political anchor of Spectrum NY1 News, host of Inside City Hall and The Big Deal with Errol Louis, joins me now. He also hosts the podcast You Decide and serves as a columnist for New York Magazine. His new column is It's Time to End the Test That's Grotesquely Segregating New York City Schools. Errol, welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you.
Listeners, who agrees and who sees things differently on this topic? Your cases for and against the SHSAT. We're at 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. Call us, text us, our lines are open. Errol, you write, quote, New Yorkers know a hustle when we see one. Do you want to pick it up from there? What's the hustle?
Sure. The specialized high schools, if you do make it in, you get access at a school like Bronx Science or Stuyvesant to some of the best teachers in the system. You have an amazing learning environment. You have a great experience, and you get pretty good consideration when it comes time to apply to college. It's really worth being at these schools. The entrance, however, to get into these schools is a deeply flawed, under-examined test, meaning there's this thing, this SHSAT, and it turns out that year after year after year, the people who make it through the gates using that test into these great learning environments tends to exclude Black and Latino kids. And in any other context, that becomes grounds for a civil rights investigation and very possibly a lawsuit, because civil rights law sort of 101 is that it's okay, or it's acceptable, it's not unlawful to have a situation where, say, Black and Latinos are excluded from a public resource, but there has to be a reason for it. And you have to demonstrate that there's no better way to do it. We have to do it this way. We went through this as a city with the fire department's entrance exam. It took 7 years in court, but in the end, the court looked at the test and said, this test has nothing to do with firefighting. This is not the right way to do it. You can't exclude people based on race if this is the test. And you have to do things differently. So they desegregated the fire department, and life went on. That happened a little over 10 years ago. With this test, I think I think it's painfully obvious, and we can talk about why, but I think it's painfully obvious that the test does not measure what we should be measuring to figure out who should get into these advanced learning environments.
So let's go into that a little bit, because you make that example with the fire department saying that that test did not measure what it should have been. And that's the argument that you're making with the SHSAT, right? You want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you three things about the test. And I know you're going to probably get a lot of calls from people who took the test, and they studied for it, and they think, well, if anybody else studied for it, there's a threshold logical fallacy, and then I'll point out three specific things that I think are wrong with the test.
Sure.
The threshold fallacy that people say, they keep both of these ideas in their head at the same time. They say that this is a test of intellectual merit, of scholastic potential. And they also say, if you study hours and hours and hours and hours, and you pay thousands and thousands of dollars to a prep company, and you spend every weekend, every vacation, every summer, every year for 5 or 10 years, and there are kids who literally do that,
sure.
then you can do well on the test. Well, both of those things can't be true. Either it tests your innate ability, or it tests your ability to get or buy prep. Yeah. I mean, and we just kind of act like it's not a question worth asking. I think it's kind of obvious. Here are three specific things that are wrong with the test. The first thing is it purports to measure English language ability among teenagers. It doesn't ask for a writing sample. I've been teaching at the college and the graduate level for over 25 years, at Columbia, at NYU, at CUNY, at Pratt. The idea that you could assess a teenager's writing ability without asking them to write at least one paragraph, I think, is ridiculous. So that's the first problem. Second problem is that they lump together the raw scores of the English and the math portion of the test, and then they score it all together. So here's what that results in, and this is an actual case. There was a PhD dissertation that looked at tens of thousands of SHSAT tests, and this is a true case from 2005. A student who got a 99, who was in the 99th percentile on the math portion of the test, and the 49th percentile on the English portion of the test, meaning a failing grade, was admitted to Stuyvesant, while a student who scored in the 97th percent on the math portion and the 92nd percentile, a much more balanced student, very high grades on the English test, was not admitted. So the scoring of it is wrong. And then I guess finally, the reality is that the test it strictly ranks you. So if you have a higher score than the person next to you and you're right at the cutoff, you get in, the other student doesn't. And those fine distinctions are much, much smaller than the margin of error. So it's not particularly predictive. It hasn't really been examined. It's not something that I think should be used in the way that it is being used. I think they should either take a cutoff like, 80, 85%, and say anybody who gets above 85% goes into a lottery. And then we'll do it that way.
Yeah. Or to step in there, I just want to cover it because I think it might be helpful to go into this. It sounds like there's actually four things, if I may. It sounds like a fourth thing that you would say, which you mentioned, is that it hasn't been examined enough, which is a flaw of what you're saying of how the test is actually making its impact. And also for listeners, what Errol was talking about with the lump of English and math scores, the summary there, if you index very well in a very high percentile, it rewards you more than being a holistic student. Errol, you were talking about like a 97-94 split, not being as good as like a 99-49 split. So
right.
I just want to cover that. Let's go to some of the calls. We've got Mark in Manhattan. Hi, Mark. Welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you? First of all, I applied to those schools years ago. I didn't get into any of them. Stuyvesant, Bronx Science. I ended up going to Yeshiva University High School. So I just want to tell you from experience. But here's the point. All the schools are different. They prepare the kids all differently. And throughout, and this is welcome to life, Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, welcome to the world the way it is. I took a bar exam, Princeton prepared that. All these exams, and the purpose of it is that you cannot, have all these levels out there of all the different students. You have to figure out a way to measure that. And I agree with you that if the test is not optimal for the reasons you're talking about, by the way, in terms of writing sample, students do submit an essay when they apply to high schools, colleges. There are a lot of different things that they can write about that they do that shows the holistic person. But if the test is flawed, which it could very well be, then don't throw out the test, figure out a better test. But how do you judge between the many different schools? And I'm a student at X school and someone's school is at Y school. How do I measure that? So about the prep, there's a way to prepare. There's no question about it. So prepare. Help the kids prepare, but don't throw out the school.
Mark, thank you so much for that. And Errol, I want to give you a chance to respond, because before I stepped in your last comment, it sounded like you were going to address what Mark was saying, which is better ways forward. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, well, look, you say welcome to the real world. I'm starting from, as you heard, a paragraph early on in the column says, we know a hustle when we see one.
Sure.
There are all of these test prep academies. My understanding is that the lower end of them is $7,000, and it can run as high as $50,000. And I'm not exaggerating when I say, I could tell you the names of people I know who spent every weekend, every vacation, every summer, every year for the better part of a decade to get ready for this test. So yes, you can valorize the test and put it on a pedestal and then make all of the kids chase after it, including the quirky way that it's graded, so that you try and excel on one part of it and maybe just ignore the other part of it. I don't think that's the right way to create a good, solid learning environment. I think it would be far better to look at a more holistic portfolio for kids, or at a minimum, to turn it into what it basically has become, which is a lottery, but have a lottery based on pure luck as opposed to the amount of prep time that you put in.
Here's a text that I'd like to get your take on as well. It says, I'm a Brooklyn Tech graduate, 1970. I never studied for the test. We had a student body that was diverse: blacks, whites, Asian, Hispanic. So what happened since then? Errol, it sounds like you had looked at a lot of historical evidence. You mentioned a person who did their PhD dissertation on examining the efficacy of the SHSAT in your column. Do you have any sense of what the historical trends were that make this texter be like, hey, stuff's different than it used to be?
Yeah, stuff is really different than it used to be. Look, I believe what happened is you have this test prep industry, and it's not the big remote companies necessarily. If you go to a neighborhood like Flushing, you can see it in many of these mini malls. There are all these little academies, and they will gladly take your money, and they tell you exactly what they are selling to you. They are selling to you a chance for your kid to make it past the gates into one of these great schools. And families will put together lots of relatives to come up with the money and back a bright kid, and really invest a lot of time and money in making sure that kid is ready to be prepped and take that test. I don't think that's the right way to pick the next generation of leadership for New York City. I just don't think it's healthy. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. There are many more ways to do it that are not racially discriminatory in their outcomes, and that allow people to sort of try and be a better, well-rounded student. At a minimum, I would also say, as the caller suggested, there's a whole range of topics that are not even taught. There are a range of topics that regularly appear on the test that are not taught in most of the middle schools in the city. So right off the bat, you're asking people to do something that is outside what I would call a sort of a fair shot at trying to pass a test. You're being tested on something that you were never told about. How is that fair? How does that even make sense? I think we can do better.
When we're looking at the test specifically as the mechanism, let me push back a little bit. Are low numbers of Black and Hispanic students alone evidence of a problem that can be resolved simply by eliminating one entrance exam?
Yes. The answer for me, look, segregated education is a problem for me, period, full stop.
Mhm.
All right. And so when 3 Black students get admissions offers to Stuyvesant out of 777 students, that's just not acceptable. I mean, it's just not acceptable. In fact, I mean, I think we should, as a city, we should just work backwards and say that's not something that we should just decide to live with.
First principles, kind of. What's the goal?
Yeah. I mean, look, every year around Martin Luther King's birthday, people talk about, all kinds of wonderful commitments to the principles that he lived by. But then, we turn around and tell all of the Black and Latino students, well, tough luck. We didn't train you. We got rid of the gifted and talented programs in the lower grades. We're testing you on something that was never taught in your school. We're not going to tell you how skewed it is, and that you should really focus on one part of the test if you are going to take a shot at it. It's just a mess. I think we really need to go back to first principles and ask, what kind of leadership are we looking for, and is this the right way to do it?
You're listening to The Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar. I'm a host here at WNYC. My guest is Errol Louis, who has a new piece in his New York Magazine column called "It's Time to End the Test That's Grotesquely Segregating New York City Schools." We got a bunch of calls, Errol, no surprise. Let's go to one of them. Darcy in Forest Hills. Hi, Darcy. Welcome to the show.
Hi. I really agree with what the author or what your expert is saying in terms of there needs to be more opportunities for students of color to be at these schools. But throwing the baby out with the bathwater is just a horrible idea. My daughter is at one of these schools in the Bronx. It's been an amazing experience. She's with kids who love school, which has been what she loves the most about it. And the admission is just based on a score. They don't look at race and keep kids out. The problem, as always, is early education. The problem is that kids in poorer areas are not getting the education that kids in more affluent areas get. My daughter did a free prep at her middle school, and maybe that's not offered everywhere. But it would just be such a shame to get rid of these schools because they're not giving us the outcome that we would desire. There just has to be a better way than wiping them off the face of the earth and letting every kid into these schools. Also, there are amazing teachers all over the city. There are amazing teachers at these schools. It's just like I have so many problems with the kind of Errol Louis, missing the nuances of how this all works in order to achieve the outcome he wants, which, again, I would support. But, keep the schools, have better education early on so that more kids can do well on the test to thrive at these great environments.
Darcy, thank you for staying with us with the caller we just had. I'll summarize what you're saying. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There are great teachers everywhere. We should expand more opportunities. Errol, while you were listening to Darcy, what came up for you?
What came up for me is there is, look, I was one of these kids who could do very well on tests. And I totally get that a really bright kid who loves school, that it's almost a form of special education. That you really want to create the right environment for kids who want to move at a pretty quick pace. I would put my own son in that category. Mm-hmm. In fact, we moved him out of one private school and put him into a different one for exactly that reason. He wasn't being challenged enough. However, I would take issue with the idea that if you let students in who are maybe not in the 99th percentile, if they're quote only in the 97th percentile, going back to an actual case, that somehow the school would be ruined, or the school would be destroyed, or the environment would be less than stimulating. That's just not true. I'm sure that's not true. Like I said, I've taught graduate school and at the college level for 25 years. I mean, that is just not the case. You want a wide variety of people's experiences, and if some are a little quicker than the others, that it does not lessen the environment at all, at all. And I would strongly urge the city not to lapse into the false impression that a pristine environment that seems to have literally absolutely no Black or Latino students is an okay space,
Yeah,
and is
sorry,
the best
keep going.
space for any New York student.
Yeah, I didn't mean to step on you there, but there's opportunity costs that you're talking about there. Like what we're gaining from the test is so much more than, or is not nearly enough for what we're losing with that pristine environment that you're talking about, actually stunting growth a little bit. Am I hearing that right?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, and look, it's a useful. It can be a useful tool. Any of these things. It's just one more indicator. I'm just suggesting, like I said, like look, draw a reasonable cutoff. Call it 90%. Call it 80%, and then make it a lottery, and automatically you'll get a lot more diversity.
Right.
Or take the valedictorians from all of the high schools. Give them on a weighted basis. Give them a chance to apply. Or at a minimum, don't test things that haven't been taught in all of the schools. For God's sake, I mean, like let's make this thing an engine to find and build excellence, not throw up our hands and say, well, we failed this kid 10 years ago, so let's validate that failure by keeping the doors closed to the best high schools.
Here's the text I'd love to read. High achieving Black students are more likely to get scholarships to private schools and go there over the top 3 public high schools. Asian students dominate the tests with community support and family support and dedicated test prep. A point not usually brought up is that the white student population is also falling while the Asian population keeps growing. Stuyvesant High School reached its lowest recorded percentage of white students in the 2021-2022 and 22-23 academic years, with the demographic dropping to approximately 15.6% of the student body, according to New York City Department of Education enrollment data. Historically, Stuyvesant's demographics shifted dramatically over the past 5 decades. So, Errol, I guess to turn that back to you, this is not based. If I had to put words in your mouth, which forgive me, but for you, it sounds like this isn't about specific race with who is there right now. This is about having something that reflects the city's identity as a whole. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, like I said, I was more startled by the passive kind of silent acceptance citywide of the near total exclusion of Black and Latino students. I just that's the part I can't live with. I mean, yeah. I don't really care who's at any given school, and you can talk about different formulas, but the number's got to be a little bit higher than 0, before we can relax, I think.
Why do you think the status quo has endured up to this point? Because it feels like this conversation happens annually. It is not certainly the first time that this conversation has happened.
Oh, yeah, I've been talking about this. I've been writing about this for 10 years now. Yeah. There are a couple of things that happen. Number one is, it's a quirk of a feature of public education that because almost everybody went to a public school, everybody thinks they understand everything there's worth knowing about a public school, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that, and because and I'm sure almost all of your callers or the messages you get will be full of people who have their own experiences from 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, and they think that they understand the problem, but it's not really like that. The other issue, though, is that these the alumni have been enlisted as a very powerful source of support for this test prep industry, and I think they're the ones who are driving a lot of this. They have a lot at stake financially. They have tried to turn it into kind of a cultural argument, which I think is unfortunate and not quite accurate. And it's frankly a part of what goes on with racism is that it's very easy to say, well, there's a bunch of underachieving Black kids, so what, or go fix the system, and then we'll have this conversation again next year. Right. And it's one of these parts of New York that we should not be proud of and we should not be tolerant of.
Yeah. Here's a text. The lack of diversity is very concerning, and at all of these schools, if I'm one of the 3 students, I would not want to go. It is hard enough to be a high school student than to be the only one in one of your classes. This is from someone who was one of only, and it wasn't one of the specialized high schools that was back in the 1970s at Fort Hamilton High School. Let's go to Rodney in Yonkers. Hi, Rodney. Welcome to the show.
Hi. I agree with your guest. I think it's complicated, and I think it's segregation and racism. But And I also agree with, I think it was Darcy who said, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. I would ask the question, how come there's only 3 black students at Stuyvesant who got in, who qualify? What happened at the middle school? What happened at the elementary school? What happened in the neighborhood? What happened to the parents? You have good schools in Manhattan. You have good schools in Brooklyn and probably in Queens. I taught in the Bronx for my career, and it's not so good. Kids I was teaching were 3 to 5 grades below reading level. Nationwide, citywide, maybe 2 grades below. And we did have, as you just quoted before, we did have 2 or 3 students, black African-American students, who then got scholarships to private high schools like Andover and et cetera. And they chose to go there. And when they came back and visited me, they felt like so out of place in the middle school where I taught. They felt like, I don't even know how I survived in this school after a year at Andover, let's say. So I would say what your guest just said, fix the system. But we've been saying that for 30, 40 years, fix the system, and it hasn't worked. So what's going on? I think we know the answer, but
Rodney,
no one,
thank you so much.
Organizing.
I'd like to ask you, what did you teach in middle school? If I could get Rodney back on the
I
line.
taught I started as an English teacher, then I became a reading specialist, and then I became a teacher of teachers at the graduate level. I was part of the effort to recruit teachers from the Midwest and overseas to teach in New York City, and I did that from the end part of my
Rodney,
career.
thank you so much. A reason why that call especially resonates with me, Errol, I was for a brief period of time in my career a high school math teacher, and what Rodney was talking about with the pipeline, like looking at what the middle school, looking what the elementary school does, it kind of echoes what you were saying about don't shut off kids who are acting at one moment a certain aptitude for the rest of their career. But it seems like it's a whole systemic fix. So what role do you see getting rid of the test or adapting the test playing with respect to what needs to happen with the system at large? Have you given that any thought?
Well, yeah, I would say, look, the whole point of public education, and this is one of the good deeds of the Eric Adams administration. One of I think they made clear that the main job of the public education system is to get kids to be able to read, write, and calculate at grade level by 3rd grade. And they spent an enormous amount of time kind of trying to optimize the whole system toward that one very important goal, getting the kids to the point where they're not learning to read, they're reading to learn, and doing it quickly. If we can, as a city, agree to do that, we have a fighting chance. But what I'm talking about, kind of at the other end of it, as students are getting ready to leave the system, is really also just kind of a cry for like some values to show that we as a city are going to live by the values that we've been trying to promulgate to these kids. I mean, to tell them that everybody has the right to try and chase after their dream and live up to their potential. We as a public system are going to spend everything we can in the way of resources to get you there. And then it all turns out to be kind of a lie, and that there's this hustle going on, and that people who can either afford or are in the know to get all of the extra prepping to get ready for a test of subjects that aren't taught in most of the middle schools. It's a pretty jarring introduction to a not so pretty side of how the city is run.
Yeah, there's a text right here. My friend's son is so proud because he went to Bronx Science. She is very wealthy and has spent thousands on tutoring and test prep. How is that fair? I'm looking at the clock. I've got one more question that I wanted to ask you, Errol, and this is about how to address it in terms of the current city administration. Do you think the mayor is listening, serious about addressing these issues?
I started and ended with a little, sort of nudge at the socialists, like the mayor.
I caught that.
Who's an alum of Bronx Science. And I wrote my version of this column, I think about 10 years ago, said, are pro-segregation progressives. They like to beat their chest and talk about a better world is possible, and they're doing this and they're doing that. And I'm like, you can't do that and allow this to continue. So let's apply some of all of that creativity and energy and all of the idealism that you've come into City Hall with, and maybe try and address this. And again, you're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Don't use the test as a strictly ranked way to exclude kids if it has this impact. Look at it, validate it, maybe swap it out, maybe get a better test, do something, but don't just continue and to look the other way. That's my only suggestion to the mayor.
We'll have to leave it there for now. My guest has been Errol Louis, political anchor of Spectrum NY1 News, host of Inside City Hall and The Big Deal with Errol Louis, New York Magazine columnist, and host of the podcast You Decide. Errol, thanks so much for writing and for coming on with us.
Great talking with you, Kusha. You're doing a great job.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And thank you all so much listening for chiming in and giving your thoughts. We really appreciate it too.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.